This is The Convergence.
Hey, welcome back to another edition of The Convergence. I'm your host, Derrick Mains. I have a guest with me today that we've really got to know each other a lot better over the last few months. Aaron Bear. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Hey, Derrick. Glad to
We've
be
been
on.
Talking about this.
Yeah, glad to finally be here with you.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to have you. And we want to chat a little bit today. You know, we've had so many conversations over the last 3 or 4 months over lunch and chatting about where Web3 is going, what the opportunities are, and how that really plays into the existing market. Not new companies per se, right? Not new, crypto and those kind of things, but how does blockchain, how do these technologies apply to larger businesses, to sort of enterprise business, and what are the industries that are going to be disrupted by that? So Aaron, maybe you could give us a little bit about your background. I know I already see the picture of the book in the background. You've got this, is it best-selling book, Exponential Theory. Great book, by the way. You can pick it up on Amazon. But Aaron, maybe you could give us a little bit of background where you're coming from that you gained this perspective about Web3.
Yeah, so, my history, I learned to program at Accenture. So I was at one time wearing a suit in a cubicle in Walgreens, building their CRM for their photo department every day with a suit and tie, learning to program JavaScript and Java. This is 20 some years ago. And since left Accenture and ultimately created a company called Buzzmouth, which was a digital strategy firm. And we completed about 400 different projects, mostly websites, some apps. Some of our apps hit number 1 in the App Store. Websites that reached 9 million visitors a week. So we did a lot of digital marketing as well as building technologies. And I sold that company to a local advertising agency here in Arizona. And since have been an innovation facilitator around digital transformation, working with very large companies like Daimler and Coca-Cola and Belfius Bank and M&C Saatchi Australia and Siemens and places, you name it, over hundreds of companies that I've facilitated workshops around digital transformation and really see the evolution of technology that they're investing in, as well as the future of technology that'll help us all connect in better ways as the world kind of transforms from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3 and potentially Web 4 and Web 5.
I'm so glad that you brought this up. Maybe you can explain what that is, right? Because you've been in it, you've created marketing agencies, you've created websites, apps. I mean, what really is Web 1 versus Web 2? And then now we're talking about Web 3 and beyond. Maybe some people don't understand particularly what that is. I mean, maybe you can give us a little education, Aaron.
Yeah, so Web 1, probably from the beginning of the web to about 2004, really is what you would say is like read only. That's one-way communication. It's your brochure websites. It's a menu for a restaurant, not even able to book that restaurant. But from 2004 on, we started having the bandwidth and the technologies to really be two-way, and that means read, write. So all of a sudden, things, the very early ones were like Friendster and MySpace around 2004 that started popping up. 2008, Facebook. So you started seeing where the users became the content generators. So that's really Web 2, is really this interactive relationship where Facebook really is nothing but a shell. I know they get criticized for their algorithm that shows, what comes up in that shell, but it is really users that are creating that. So now Facebook has to be responsible for users' content.
Which has always been, I'm glad you talk about this, because I was involved as an entrepreneur in that sort of Web 2 space. One of my co-founders at my company at the time had created a site, Clip to Go, that a lot of people say was like the first early. So you could literally like take pieces from websites and drop them into this other website and share them with people. And people were just mind blown by that. They were like, who would want to do this? Or when we launched Green Nurture, the biggest objection we had was Green Nurture was a platform where we fed in some educational information about sustainability, but the employees generated the conversation and the ideas, and they voted on what things to do. And the biggest objections that we got from big companies that you named, was, we don't want our employees talking to each other. Like, why would we allow them to communicate with each other without their manager present? It was like, wow. And now today, everything is sort of socialized, including, TikTok and all these other places. People are live streaming themselves being fired and all sorts of stuff. But it is really amazing to see how that has progressed from, I like the way you explain it, from read to read write. And now this next generation of Web3 is a lot more advanced than that.
Yeah. So you can, on a simple term, you could say read, write, own. So meaning that, if you're going to put content out there, right now you're starting to see, the formations of the metaverse, which, somehow we're going to have to create a lot of bridges to these different worlds. Otherwise, we have these few companies. My book, Exponential Theory, I talk about these main companies that have kind of taken over our access to the internet, whether it's Google, Microsoft, Facebook, and really talk about how those companies really are controlling what we see with their algorithms, understanding how it's potentially dividing us as people, as the algorithms themselves don't always work exactly how, they're built, or they form opinions about what you think. So they feed you the content that they think is going to be most appealing to you, which means that you're getting a lot of the same group thought and, becoming more and more divided. Where I think the future is this kind of idea that, and this is where blockchain and this really Web3 world come into place, where I think of it as the trusted internet. Right now we have Web 1. There's a lot of Web 1 and Web 2, places. There's a lot of that really is untrusted, meaning we don't necessarily have trust of places that we go or things that we see. And right now you're looking at, a lot of news and different things that are controlled by a few people, and why you're seeing them or why they're going viral is because of those control mechanisms, whether that's an algorithm that, is feeding you. So how do we get beyond that? Well, like blockchain, and I guess the promise of crypto anarchy, I guess, is the idea is like, let's take this back over from the big companies. How do we actually create a mechanism that we actually trust each other online? Blockchain is one of those first things, is we can trust some of the blocks. It's not to say, there's blind trust. It's the fact that we can create proof of work, proof of stake, some of these concepts that have really created, a decentralized, permissionless, native, and what I would say is trust environment to really be able to transact, where now a number, the anonymity of something really creates a transaction that people can on the platform, wherever they're accessing that from, whether their own wallet or from a system, and that's really where now we're boiling some of those technologies that were at one time, what we would say was against, going, a few people controlling. We're finding that those companies are starting to find new ways to control those access points.
Sure.
And I think that leads to a whole new layer of the internet. And similar to what you just mentioned about the company that you had, is that you could post on different webs. But I see a whole nother layer where browsers, are owned by companies and controlled. I see the future is, in essence, a browserless world, where we potentially jump from different metaverses, different websites to different email systems. But we choose like our own customized solution. At the end of the day, right now, if you look at any industry, whether it's marketing automation, there's 10,000 apps to choose from for software as a service. And they all do one thing or another, but you could look at ag tech or food tech or any random space, and you're going to see all these options and variability. And what I see it is this world's kind of coming together, colliding, where all of them are going to want to create their own little ecosystems that they themselves can actually feel that they have trust amongst their peers, as well as can have conversations, especially in a virtual environment, that you're having authentic conversation. So the idea of anonymity actually leads to places of more trust when you can actually create communities that are very defined around a space. And that's unfortunately when it was Web 1 or Web 2, we weren't really able to do that. And Facebook or Google or one of these social networks were really controlling the messaging between us. And what we can trust is our friends post, as long as it's authenticated. And right now we see it all the time where people I lost my Instagram account for a while, and people got all kinds of random messages and probably hurt my credibility or who I with some of those, but obviously got that back over a few months. It took actually a few months to get back. That's what the future can't, we got to be able to port our content, move on to the next place, and so forth.
Yeah, you make some really interesting points in there, and just a couple sort of observations and points I wanted to make. I really like your read, write, own, because, back in the late 2000s when I had my tech company, I was writing a lot of really cutting edge content. And we actually had one of the biggest ad agencies in the world, if not the biggest ad agency in the world, that we actually discovered that they were literally stealing our content and rewriting it and publishing it on their website. But and we caught them once, and we actually said, hey, look, you literally verbatim just took an entire article off my website and posted it. And a few weeks later in their newsletter, they sent out an interview as if one of their team had interviewed me and written this entire article that was written as if they were interviewing me. And I'm like, I'm actually the author of the article, but they didn't even bother to contact us anything. They just literally stole it. And there was, because of the search optimization, right? Because of the search engines, there was really no way for me to prove it, because my article was on page 4 and theirs was being retweeted and published all around the world. And I'm going, this is really fascinating, because the ownership of my content, they knew how to play the game better than I did. So they were able to literally take my thought leadership article and publish it as their own. And I couldn't really say anything, because everybody else is like, yeah, but look how big they are. And actually the one email back I did have with their attorney, he was like, well, you should be proud that they took your information and wanted to share it more broadly. I'm like, well, if they would have given me credit, yeah, that would have been great. But I think that's part of the challenge. And I wonder how some of this read, write, own thinking, how do you see that being affected, particularly by AI? Because, I write, you write, you've written books, I've written books. Now, recently, I've come across things like Jasper, where I can start to just type an idea and it will literally populate the entire paragraph for me and start to write things out. And I know there's a guy I believe he's on YouTube, that's been writing a novel in Jasper just based upon one sentence. And he's literally just hitting the Command J button, and the AI keeps bringing up more and more content. And that's sort of problematic too. I mean, we've seen this with artwork now. The art industry is really struggling trying to understand how, some of these websites, and I fool around with a lot of them, and I think they're really cool what the AIs can do, but who owns that? Who owns the idea and who owns the content?
Well, I think it goes, to art as an example, copying, copy is always, everything's always been copied. I think that's,
sure, of course.
Now it's copied in the masses, meaning that it's happening much, much faster. And that's the how I look at, technology is the one thing, or when I'm working with CTOs or CEOs, really to kind of prepare them about a digital transformation or a strategy. It's the fact that this right now is the slowest moment there will ever be. So if you don't make this decision, it kind of speeds up, and this decision compounds very, very quickly. So the one thing that we know for certain is things are speeding up. They're not slowing down. So with deep fakes, with AI, with machine learning, with, really neural networks, and you start building kind of quantum computing, and, once we get to some of those places, we've now eclipsed, and this is really where you look at the exponential curve of technology acceleration. Right now, we probably have technologies that's equivalent to the brain, meaning the brain is really still, the beauty of it is it's still the most complex thing that we know of in the universe. and it's inside our head.
Yeah.
Computers are not able to quite do what a brain does, but in the next 15 to 20 years, as we get to quantum computing and such, we'll go past the equivalent of a human brain to potentially all human brains. And that's where, the acceleration of speed, all these things are going to be, that much more of an issue or of an opportunity. And that's where I look at this exponential period that we're going into, where we need to reinvent a lot of things that don't work very well. I mean, for a long time, a few people have made decisions for the masses that have had negative impacts on the masses. Well, the society, we've spoken out from civil justice and reform, as well as the environment. We can no longer accept companies that don't accept responsibility for, what they're doing. And I think that comes to the accountability of video, of, digital, of all these different things. The thing that we have to be careful of, and I think we alluded to this, is, how, different social media is really dividing us. That gets a lot worse when you start doing deep fakes. You have former President Obama saying things that he would never say, but people then share that. The share button is literally the most dangerous button, because all of a sudden you're validating that this is true, and it's accelerating, a negative message. And that's where, clickbait, if you look at even how journalism is written anymore, it's not written necessarily to inform, but it's, and I read a chapter in my book called Craig Killed the News, where I talk about Craigslist, which
I remember
was
that,
Web 1.0.
Yeah.
Where you could put an ad out and then people would buy stuff, by calling a number or whatever. So it really was just 1.0. 2.0 is, you have OfferUp and Let Go and all these different marketplaces. But really, Craigslist was the first one to really disrupt journalism. And journalism is probably the first industry that got completely disrupted by digital. And it's really been democratized to the point that journalism is now very much sensationalized, and it's been politicized to the point that we've divided, where you have Fox on the right and CNN on the left, and other groups even further on each side.
Oh, I have some family members that'll tell you Fox News is liberal, and that that's as bad as CNN. I mean, you got to go way far to the right. That's the challenge, right?
Well,
is that
Kanye's buying a Parler. Kanye bought Parler today,
right? And the unfortunate part is, Aaron, I mean, and listen, I was actually a part of this early on in the 2000s when I worked in the environmental field. And, one of the sort of internal jokes was always, if you share really misleading information, and you can get, at the time, it was a lot of conservatives, to share it on social media, that when somebody looks it up and actually stops for a second and looks it up, they'll all be made fools of. And this is very true. I still see a lot of information on this today, particularly around EVs, and lithium mining is the one that always gets you. We're like, oh, lithium mining is so bad for the environment. And I'm like, you realize we get our lithium from seawater. We don't really mine lithium, and we haven't done a lot of lithium mining in a long time. But those memes weren't created by conservatives to share misinformation. They are literally created by liberals to make people look foolish. And the flip side happens too, because we know we all have confirmation bias. So we see something and we immediately share it. And then somebody looks it up and goes, this is completely false. And you're like, well, that's bullshit, right? It's like, well, no. I mean, your point about the share button, it is the most dangerous. We should rewrite: the pen is mightier than the sword. The share button is mightier than both, exponentially, because it really is a very, very dangerous thing. And it's unfortunately not something you can even fight against, because we've now been programmed to believe that if somebody opposes that with facts or logic, that must mean that they're your enemy. I don't know how the hell we ever slid this deep, but I mean, it is a really big problem. But maybe Web3 can change that. Well, or maybe it makes it worse.
It's a mindset, though, that we shouldn't trust everything that we see. And I think Web3 requires a reprogramming to understand what networks you can trust or not trust. And I think that's what we're doing, even when you could say, all these things as SEC cracks down on blockchain because we created, whatever, 50,000 different altcoins. And, whether a lot of those were Ponzi schemes or some of them actually have utility and different things. I mean, you can make a decision on each one of them and probably argue each side. I think for the most, it's helping people get educated on what their own beliefs and to stand convicted to those. I think the future is probably standing in the middle of a web that, if you own it, is that you decide where you're going to play. Like right now, companies are deciding how you think.
I see.
And I think that's part of where society has slid because, and I always, in my book, I talk about Howard Stern and, shock and awe. And Howard Stern knew that if he just, and I think in his movie, Private Parts, he talked about, I actually just say things to upset the people that don't like me, and they listen twice as long as the people that like me. And you can see that on every news cycle is how do they actually do that? And it's even in marketing, as I helped some of these things go viral, I knew how to push the line on something so that people would get upset about something, and then it would go viral.
All right, I want to chat with you for a minute or two about Central Business Development. They're my sponsor and underwriter here at the show, and I think it's important to spend a little bit of time understanding what they do, because if you're listening, you're probably interested in this marketplace and you maybe even have an idea. So one of the things I really like about Ryan and the team at Central is that they are really entrepreneurs. They aren't just a development firm that sits there and takes orders from big companies of, hey, we need you to build this out. They really are partners. I've seen this with them now multiple times. I've had listeners of this show that have reached out to them and created projects with them. I've had guests of the show create relationships with Central Business Development. And what they all have really found is that there's this great opportunity to be an entrepreneur with them, where you can approach them with an idea and say, hey, here's what we were thinking, and really get a jam session and a whiteboard session with these guys and figure out how do you take that idea and make it a reality if it's possible, or is that even an idea that should be considered in blockchain just yet? That's what I like about what Central does. So I would encourage you to check out centralbusinessdevelopment.com. Reach out to them, even if it's just, hey, look, we're wondering how blockchain is going to affect our real estate investment firm in the future, and you want to just have that time chatting with folks that understand and know this industry. And maybe there's a project to be created there for you. Maybe there's an opportunity to be an entrepreneur out inside your industry and create something new and exciting that will not only affect your business and how it works into the future, but might be a disruptor to other industries as well. It's an old technique, and a lot of people don't actually realize that. And not to get into any politics here, but Roger Stone and Donald Trump were both mentored by the same guy, and a lot of people don't know who that was, and that was Roy Cohn. And Roy Cohn in the 50s and 60s was known as this, super bombastic attorney. He prosecuted all the communists inside the US government. He had people executed for being traitors against the government. And he was very notorious for just absolutely, completely outrageous things that he couldn't back up, he would say in court, just to make people in the jury go, well, wait a second, what if he's right? And the judge, and then he would use the fact that the judge would force him to throw it out and tell the jury, you have to ignore that, and then he would point out later on, like, whoa, isn't it funny that they want you to ignore all these facts, right? And the next thing you know, he would get juries to turn in his favor. So there's a lot about that guy in particular. Like, he learned this methodology, and unfortunately, it has become sort of the undercurrent of the American media. But let's hope that maybe Web3 can be a solution to this. I don't know. But for any listeners, if you haven't yet heard of Roy Cohn, it is mind-boggling when you start to read about him, some of the things he wrote and said, and how it's really come to pass in the US here in the last 5-10 years.
Yeah, and I think we're all in a repetitive history, right? Like, a lot of times people say it's the first time it's been used. To your point, these tactics have been around from literally before the 18th century. Yeah, so sure. It's now just at an accelerated pace that our mind, we can only handle 7 plus or minus 2 things. The reality is the variables that go into making decisions are so much bigger. So we're going to have to rely on AI and machine learning to be able to make decisions in the future. And part of that is, as we lean into Web3, as things, honestly converge, but also how they diverge. You're going to see different parts of the world diverge. And I think that's the opportunity that there's a huge opportunity to make money, to be involved in that, as that world grows. But it's doing the unconventional things. And that's what we're really seeing that really takes off today. To your point, is not doing something like everyone else. Like, right now is not the time to launch another Facebook, right? It's probably to launch the anti-Facebook, right? Yeah. And those are the periods, and those are the entrepreneurs, when you start thinking contrarian, is now you can start finding these different groups of people that are interested in certain things that you could build extreme trust in. And we're starting to see that in different industries. And I think it's around identifying, creating digital identities, creating records, really creating the different things that we're missing from the current, read write.
Yeah.
Is how do we know that Derrick's saying this, to your point, where right now we can fake that. We've got to figure out how we authenticate the authors in a way that's meaningful.
Yeah. It's such a good point too, because I see a lot of memes that get shared about the economy and things. And I won't call him out by name, but there's one guy in particular that there's actually dedicated websites to how badly he predicts everything. Every prediction he comes out with, he said the internet would be gone in a few months. I mean, like, it just goes back. Every time he calls for a recession, guaranteed it's going to be a huge boom, but he's still quoted all the time. And it's like, if you just authenticated just take 10 of his things and authenticate them, you would find that pretty much the only way to make money is to do exactly the opposite of what he says. But yet, for some reason, he's really good at social media. And people, see, I just had a really good friend who I think is really smart, shared something the other day. And I hit her up and I'm like, okay, look into this guy. And she was like, wow. He's like completely the opposite of what you think. I'm like, exactly. And that, I think, to your point, is really where it has to go. It has to go to this authentication. I think when we lived in a society that was very face-to-face, you had to be a little bit more of a sociopath to fool people. Today, you just turn your camera off and you can type whatever you want. Well, let's hope that happens.
The message travels until it hits an inbox that buys into it. And I think that leads to a couple of things. Like I see Web3, like some really big macro ideas in Web3 is this, right now we have this global inequity where you have talent around the world that can contribute and really create rising tides. And, right now, whether we look at it, systemic racism or systemic issues, how you can start solving that is, through a blockchain that just validates someone that's incredible at maybe developing CAD software, or, and they may live, who knows where they live, but all of a sudden when we corporations, and you got to think about this from a global perspective, now start making decisions is like, well, if I go to India and now this becomes a race thing and we don't think of it as that, I can get cheaper labor.
Yeah.
Even though we're really looking for output of talent,
better talent is what you're looking for. Yeah.
The best output. And maybe that creates a more of a global economy. As much as the global economy right now has been to exploit labor, has been to figure out ways to do that. I mean, that creates an opportunity. I think another is really just connecting people authentically, and I think of like dating apps. How do you do that for business? All of a sudden, if there's AI and machine learning and layers of this, we can start to connect people like you and I, Derrick. I mean, like we've met a few months ago. We have a lot of different things in common, a lot of different, business and different things that we've learned about. But what if
great wine too, by the way? So that's one of the many things in common. I had a little get together a weekend ago, and Aaron stopped by with a great bottle of wine, so it was great. But yeah, you're right. So
it's like, how do you connect with people on the things like, and just making friends? Like, how does digital assist you in really creating a world that you care about? Because right now, all as it's doing, Web 2 is dividing us because of the algorithms. How do we make Web 3 actually help us bring us together into smaller communities that we actually care about? And this is really the issue that we kind of talked about. Is this? It is a mental health issue, and society is going through an issue of compare culture and cancel culture, where anything that doesn't look like them, act like them, or be like them. Yet the world would be very uninteresting if we all did and acted the same way and thought the same thing. And I have a good friend of mine that runs this human resource association, and he said, diversity, around diversity, equity, and inclusion is, diversity is here. Like, we are living a diverse world. It's not diversity that we're really, wanting to create in the world. And I think this is where Web3 can help. It's really inclusion. It's a seat at the table and a voice. And I think what we've seen from this is when you control algorithms and you manage this, where hate wins. And I don't like to say that, because hate, my kids, there's only one word I actually say. You can drop the F-bomb, you can say whatever you want, just don't use the word hate. And there's a few other words around that would imply that, and in my book, I have
close-minded,
we are all one, thinking bigger about it. Yet I think there are ways in Web3, and if you think about these layers of technology that can be added, is how do we actually create that equitable future for people? How do we actually, based on your contribution, not necessarily who you are? And I think right now we like to, pinpoint, this person is this. And, hey, they're doing better than their peers. Well, are they doing better than society?
Yeah.
So I think
that's a really great point. Yeah. And I think you do, yeah, for sure. And I on the global piece, it's interesting because I do a lot of consulting work, and I've used, I looked the other day, I had done something like 130 projects on Fiverr this year. So I mean, I'm every day, 3 or 4 times a day, I'm in conversations with people all around the world. And one of the things I've noticed with Fiverr in particular, when it first came out, Fiverr was all about it's cheap, right? And it's like, I know it's not going to be done well, but it's cheap. But that has really changed in the last couple of years. I can tell you, I have 3 different consultants that I found through Fiverr. All 3 of them work for Fortune 1000 companies in executive roles. But they're on Fiverr. They might be in Europe. They might have a language barrier in the place that they live. They might be in India, but they're the CTO of a big company there, and they make the equivalent of American executive salary, but they're looking for challenging ideas. They're looking to meet other people. And I've noticed that anymore, the very poor quality, cheap people are no longer there. And it's becoming higher and higher priced, even to the point I many times will compare local sellers with international sellers. There's not much price difference anymore. You can get a $200 project done in Zambia, and the guy from Austin is $200. So that tells you that there is some equity coming to that. But these platforms are doing that, and they're using the rules of capitalism, right? To say, to your point, it's not about who you are, it's about the contribution that you make and the value you bring. And when you bring more value, you should be able to raise your price, and people will pay it because they see that value in what you do.
Yeah, and I think that's for tech people around the world, that's the great equalizer. Now let's think outside of technology or executive or strategy roles. We have to think and venture out that. And that's where I say every industry Web3 can impact, because you can create those communities that are relevant to you, that are important to you, and really start to solve problems on a systemic level. And I say systemic, I mean a global level, but also it could be a neighborhood level. Right now, neighbors barely know each other to walk out their front door.
Yeah, so true. Hi. My neighborhood is very unique in that regard, that we intentionally have events almost every month, and everybody gets invited, and you just keep getting invited until you eventually just give up. You're like, I mean, that's a great, it's a nice thing though. I mean, it really is, because everybody watches out for everybody else. And that's just something that I had not experienced in a long time. Because most people
unique, and I've been to your neighborhood, and I get it. I think it also takes someone like yourself to galvanize people to kind of make those connections. And not every community has that, but what if you could create that in every community? And I think those are some of the ideas of like Nextdoor or some of these different things.
Yeah.
They don't act like that. They act more like policing units of the neighborhood versus actually how do we actually bring a neighborhood together?
Yeah, no, that's very interesting though. And I can see how you really got me thinking about how do this is the great equalizer, I think, in a lot of senses. And it's funny because I still do hear some of the arguments from people that say, well, all of these sites are taking American jobs. And I'm like, wait, do we really have a shortage of jobs in America right now? Like I told a friend of mine who's a political consultant, that he's like, jobs are the thing that always wins elections. I'm like, not right now. If you're a business owner, you're telling me you're going to create jobs. All you're saying to me is you're going to create more inflation, raise wages, already screw up this market. There's a reason that there's a lot of people that want to come into this country. It's because it's a demand problem we have. We need more and more people. So it isn't like it was in the 70s where we had 10% unemployment. We just don't have that anymore. We need additional people and additional resources to fund these economies. And being able to go globally and find people, I think, is a real advantage.
I think it's a global underemployment. It's not necessarily that there's not employment. It's that people, right. And if you were really to, talk about an existential crisis for all of this new generation is, how do they find their purpose and how do they find their greatest potential? We go on to Maslow's hierarchy, how do you actually help people, without necessarily, a lot of people, I always say self-help is the worst thing because people don't want to be helped, yet they want to be developed. And I think part of that is how do you create a community that you develop people so that they can step into the roles? There's a mass, your baby boomers are all retiring, my generation, Gen X, we're, have some leadership roles, but we're a relatively small group. This new group of Gen Y and Millennial and Gen Z and whatever else that's behind that, they're being forced to be in leadership roles much, much earlier in their careers where maybe they're not ready. Yeah. Some of them are. I mean, some of them are doing incredible jobs of, leading, huge enterprises and helping create employment and those things. But it's really getting the community that you help people find their purpose and what they care about. And that's where I see, like, when you look at even the altcoins, when you start looking at all these different kind of commerce engines, like if you can base something, an economy around something you care about, now you have a common denominator. And I'm not thinking that most of those really did that, but I think the future is going to demand that. It's going to be like, okay, like your Kool-Aid character in your background. I mean, running through the wall. There's people that to you, obviously it means a lot, but like all of a sudden, how could I make that painting so valuable? Well, if I created a community of Kool-Aid, all of a sudden, and everybody's looking at that all the time, that's going to come more value. Well, you can think about any type of piece of an asset or a digital asset now, NFTs, that when you start creating communities around these things that people care about, and that's where, like a lot of people, said this NFT gold rush is it, the ones that really mattered were the ones that actually got you into a club that made
you part the ones that had utility. Yeah. Memberships, right.
It was more than just the asset itself. And we can print 10,000, images and say there's only limited 5 each or whatever, but that really is just another inflationary tool that, will not be accepted in the future. It's creating.
Well, I wonder. Yeah, I think that's the thing that a lot of people missed is, I can go on to Fiverr right now and I can get 10,000 NFTs, all unique, for $1,400. There's no utility behind it. If it's just artwork. Now, there's one thing if it's actual artwork, right? And Justin, I don't know, were you here still when he was here on Friday night? But yeah, he showed up and got some new paintings and stuff. And, but here's an actual artist that is starting to develop the NFT. There was another artist here and they were starting to talk about those kind of things as well. But it's the utility of connecting those two things together, I think, that is really the most important. If you're just in it to create artwork, it's like the meme coins and all that other kind of stuff. It doesn't have any real purpose or meaning. And I do think we're really early on. I think we're in that super early stage. People say to me, do you really think this blockchain thing is going to take off? And I'm like, well, I remember in 1996, or 1990s when we had the dot-com boom. That wasn't the end of dot-coms. That was actually the beginning of dot-coms. There was a whole bunch of shit in the marketplace and it just got flushed out. And I think a similar thing has happened with crypto and NFTs. I think the NFT sales are down, 92% this year over last. I mean, the reality starts to set in on these things. Let's transition that. Please go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
The hype cycle happens faster and every market, and this is where the more resistance, you put into something, the more it's going to grow, because you have, and there's enough people. And that's where, as you look at people used to ask me, like, is Bitcoin ever going to be $1 million? And I'm like, well, definitively, yes, someday it will be. I mean, it's a matter of time and people and interest. And, when that is, obviously it's a little bit longer than people thought it was going to be, maybe some of the experts. And that's the reality of the world we live in, is anybody that claims they're an expert in anything are given false hopes, because this is all being written, and are things going to fail and go to zero? Yes. There's a lot of things that have gone to zero. We've seen that is flushing out the stuff that does not have utility or that does not actually add value. In the end, like these communities that really grow around these different, whether it's art or whether it's, around words or whatever it is, you can think of any different. We're going to go through an explosion of creativity as we have in the last 5 years, but it's going to accelerate at such a rate. And this, I look at Peter Diamandis has made this, in the next 10 years, we're going to create as much wealth as that happened in the last 100 years. So think about the last 100. And that's where people start to have is Web3 going to happen? It's happening. It's not that it's, we're maybe 1 or 2% into it, just like the internet. For how many years till 2004, we were 1 or 2% into the internet. You didn't have it on a phone. Like 2000, literally until about 2007, when the iPhone came out and Android had a little bit, we didn't have colored browsers on our phones. No. We didn't have a way to access. Now we know, laptops are in decline, tablets are in decline, everything's in decline but phones. And yet now we're thinking about the next thing beyond that. And that's where, the metaverse, for that really to be successful, it's going to be Derrick's metaverse. It's going to be Aaron's metaverse. And it's going to be around things that I care about. And it may be associated with different companies, but I'm going to be able to take that where I want based on the community that I stand and hold. And I think that's where this read, write, own, changes different things, where that's where currencies and different things, we've seen little economies sprout up in ways that people can use loyalty and points. I mean, the original one is airlines that, created point systems.
Yeah.
That was the original tokenization of something. Now we're seeing better ways that can be done that way. And, the research, the top 100 companies investing in blockchain have over $1 trillion of investments. It's not a small.
It's not a joke anymore. No. Well, and that brings me to, and I don't know why it sparked it whenever you were saying that. Maybe it was about the building the wealth over the next 10 years. But I had heard just recently, and I don't have anything to back this up, but was a financial advisor that was saying that in the next 15 to 20 years, there's the greatest transfer of wealth in human history that will occur when the baby boomers start to die off and their children start to inherit something like $72 trillion in assets that are going to be inherited by our generation and the generations underneath us. What is that going to change about work? What's it going to change about what we want, where we want to live, what we want to do? If all your basic needs are covered, because you inherited $500,000 and it's sitting in an account someplace, but that also might mean the people that don't inherit anything are going to get farther and farther behind. I mean, we could probably get into a whole hour of philosophical conversation about how that transference of wealth will make a lot of people very, very happy, but probably also will make a lot of people very sad too. But it does go to show that the opportunities are just starting to hit the marketplace.
Yeah, and I think there's some dystopian beliefs. If you watch any film, it really has a dystopian future of the have and have nots. And we're accentuating that. That also often goes to a certain level, then gets pulled back, and we're probably been hitting on those boundaries once again. Back in the 1860s, there was the first, where the robber barons kind of came to market, and they were much, much more wealthier than even Elon Musk is today. But now what you want to look at is places like San Francisco and New York, that in the last 10 years, even though they've had a wealth explosion, you've seen a crime explosion. And San Francisco is somewhat of an unsafe place to just be about, because
we used to go every couple of months. I won't go there anymore. It's just too, it's not a safe place.
It's a sad story, but it's thinking about how do we rise all boats. And I think,
Yeah.
it's to your point of there'll be a lot of entitlement and inheritance that comes with this transformation. I actually talk about in the last chapter of my book is really how we have to force ourselves into a more sustainable, like we just have to do better for the environment. We have to do better for people. And what companies need to start thinking about is, not just their core customer, but like especially the really big companies, is how do they get to a much larger customer base so that they start thinking about the unintended consequences of only serving a few people. And I think of it as brands like Mercedes-Benz that no longer do we aspire to have just a luxury car because we want to share cars. And when they become autonomous, we're going to want the freedom to just get in a pod and go exactly where we want. So now you've disrupted a whole automobile industry. Now that all can be on the blockchain, and that all can be something that's transacted in a way. But I think as you drive some of these costs down, as we understand technology has driven, laptops or TVs, you see electric vehicles, Elon Musk model to drive the cost down. It's not necessarily affordable for the average person now. But as we kind of continue to improve this technology, how do we actually bring people up so they become contributing? And that really comes down to purpose, and it comes down to helping them find communities. And that's where I hope is to have technology that you use technology, don't be used by technology. And I think right now we're being used by technology to make the few rich. Web3 is the promise that we can use it for ourselves to make ourselves rich. And I think part of that is even creating your own Instagram following and, some of these people.
Your personal brand. Yeah.
Yeah. The YouTube generation is the number one career, like for high schoolers is like, I want to grow up and be a YouTuber. Well,
they want to be content creators. Yeah. Thanks, Aaron. And thank you all for joining us here on The Convergence.
Thanks for listening to The Convergence. If you want more information about the topics you've heard here today, reach out to us at theconvergencepodcast.com.